So yeah, this is a new experience for me having slides. I haven't put the About Me one, and this is how I normally do slides. If I'm going to have any kind of slide or whatever, I'll use some sort of prop instead. But this is a talk that I would normally do using a whiteboard. And I figured if I can recreate the kind of thing that I would do with a whiteboard with slides, then that works. So I don't have many bullet points or whatever, although that said, like pretty much my first slide is a bullet point. Anyway, it's me, you know how to reach me. And my talk is about quadrant systems. I'll explain a whole bunch of stuff about that as we go. You know how to reach me. In fact, those contact details I'm putting at the bottom of every slide, so that if it turns out that while we're going along, if you go, oh, hang on, how was I supposed to reach him? It's there at the bottom of the slide. This talk is one that I actually give to two kinds of audiences. One of them is for data people like you, and the other one is business people. Okay. Now the concept here is that there's going to be elements that I would primarily be speaking to a business person with, and elements that are more kind of like the meta side, right? So what I'm doing is if you look in the top right-hand corner of the slide there, you'll see that it says BP. This means that when it says BP, I'm kind of talking to, apart from right now, it kind of means I'm talking to business people. It's that side of the talk, right? And it's not that it's not relevant to you as a data professional. It's just that you've got to think about who my audience is as far as who I'm really directing this at, right? So there's a difference between that and if I change slides here, when it says DP in the top corner like that, this means that I'm kind of being a slightly more meta about the stuff that I'm talking to the business people with, right? Business people, you know, their clients, their potential clients, that kind of thing. I'm trying to persuade them about the importance of things about their data. As a data professional, hopefully, you probably know a lot of this stuff already about the particular things that I'm looking at. When I talk about data quality, you get what that means. I'll explain it here if it's an element that's kind of directed at a business person. I want you to be thinking about how that applies to the ways that you can impact business. I'll change hats, that kind of thing. We'll see how we go. But I'll do that by pointing out that the top right-hand corner thing. I kind of figure, you know, there's a guy who works for Microsoft called James Whitaker. He actually physically changes his hat when he's talking about giving presentations versus he's giving a sample presentation bit. He puts a hat on or takes a hat off depending on which one he's doing. I'm just going to change what it says in the top corner. Anyway, not big on bullet points. So when I talk about a quadrant system, it's this kind of a thing. You see this talked about all the time, this Gartner Magic Quadrant. This is the one for BI and analytics platforms. And you'll notice that there are two axes and they split the square into 4 quadrants, okay? So you'll see the bottom axis says completeness of vision. You'll see the side one says ability to execute. For somebody who is strong in both completeness of vision and in ability to execute, they're listed as a leader. And if they are strong in the ability to execute, but less so in completeness of vision, they're listed as a challenger. Visionaries are the ones in the bottom right, where they're strong on completeness of vision, but less so on ability to execute. You get this, right? Niche players at the bottom left corner. You hear this talked about amongst marketing people, and so on. Business people get this stuff. In fact, I mentioned that I was developing a while back, I mentioned that I was developing content around this quadrant system to a friend of mine. And he was just like, now you're speaking my language. Oh my goodness. And he sent me a screenshot of, look, here's me. I'm a Gartner premium member. He sent me a screenshot of the Gartner site where it listed him as a premium member and so on. I mean, he got excited by this. He gets it because he's a business person. I mean, he's actually also a data person, but he understands that from the business perspective, this is really important stuff, right? So I want to highlight a couple of things about this as we go, and then I'll jump into the ones that I like to talk about, and you'll see the parallels and so on. Now, if I go back to early 2017, there was a company called ThoughtSpot that jumped in to that first appeared. They weren't there back in 2016, but ThoughtSpot appeared for the first time then. They appeared in that red area that I've circled on there in the niche player section, and they would have made a big deal about just being considered for the Magic Quadrant at all. The fact that Gartner considered that they were significant enough to assess and figure out where they were and so on, they would have been talking about that a lot, right? Now, a year later, 2018, they had moved up and to the right, and in fact, they have moved from the niche player quadrant across to visionaries. Now, they would have talked a ton about this. They would have been really excited about it and so on, but a year later, they've moved up into the leaders quadrant. The only other leaders there in that, in early 2019 were Microsoft, Tableau, and Click. This is a big deal for them. I'm sure if you go to ThoughtSpot's website, I'm not suggesting you do, but I'm sure if you do, that they will somewhere be talking about the fact that they are considered a leader in this. It means something to them. It means something to their marketing. It means something to everybody in their business context. It's a big deal for them, right? Now, they saw that journey from quadrant to quadrant, and that would have been exciting for them. If I think about Microsoft's journey, if I go back to, and then in 2020, they've settled down into, they're still in that leader quadrant, and they'd be talking about the fact that for a second consecutive year they're there, and so on. Microsoft have a different kind of story. If I go back to 2015, this is before Power BI had come out. Remember, Power BI has just turned 5. And so early 2015, Power BI was not out yet. And they were there. They were still listed as a leader, but they were very much in the pack. There were quite a few leaders back then. Tableau was out in front on the ability to execute, but there were quite a few companies who were kind of jostling for position with them on that completeness of vision, right? But Microsoft already listed as a leader there. Over the coming years, they moved across and became the outright leader, not just a leader, but the leader on the completeness of vision. And then 2017, they had moved up in their ability to execute. Power BI hadn't just, wasn't quite so new. It was establishing itself. As time goes on, they establish themselves as the leader also in the ability to execute, as Power BI was reaching a lot of maturity and becoming a very serious player. And then in 2020, this year, something interesting happened. And that's that Microsoft actually moved back a little bit in completeness of vision. But significantly, they moved kind of to a point where the balance between the completeness of vision and the ability to execute was there. They became more balanced. I kind of figure if I consider like a diagonal line through the middle of this, and I'm sure you're getting how I do this with a whiteboard, easily. They ended up almost right on that balance line where their completeness of vision was matched by their ability to execute. And what I see in these kinds of quadrant systems is that the closer you are to that balance section, the better. Even if you're weaker, if you're in that blue section there that I've highlighted, where you've kind of got imbalance, there's something that's not quite right. You might have fantastic completeness of vision. I mean, if I go back a few years to when Power BI had just come out and Microsoft had pushed way forward on the completeness of vision, but their ability to execute wasn't quite there. The concept of visionary is an interesting thing. More on that as we go. But certainly, if you're balanced, you might not be as strong as you could be, but the balance, I think, is important. Of course, for Microsoft, they've always been a leader, and so I think they're probably only going to really consider that top section of the quadrant system. They're just going to be like, look, we're a leader. We jostle for position against Tableau, even Click have kind of been left behind a bit as far as Microsoft has pushed out beyond Tableau even. Those are the two that are kind of setting themselves apart. Click's every year going to be saying, hey, look, we're a leader. But they're only a leader. There's still room for improvement within this quadrant system. I mean, you get this stuff, right? I'm hoping that you get this stuff. I don't really want to talk about this quadrant, the Gartner quadrant, much more. I want to start thinking about my own one, right? Now, I want to talk here about, I'm now talking more to business people, okay? So you'll notice in the top corner, I've changed it from DP to BP. Let's switch. I'll still talk a bit to data people. You don't need to kind of switch off too much, but still. Now, in any organization, I kind of figure that any particular piece of data that we want to consider, and this might be a report, this might be just a whole section of data, in fact, and so on, but there's such a thing as data quality. Now, this is not really so much about the kinds of things that we put database constraints in place, like primary keys and foreign keys and so on. Because honestly, if you're getting primary key violations in your system, there's something else going on. I'm talking about data quality like somebody's misspelt the word Hamish. You know, I'm sure he gets it all the time. But it's hard to spot that. I mean, sure, Hamish is a relatively commonly found name. Probably someone's going to be able to spot that. But a lot of names these days, you know, they're unique spellings. Is that the right way of putting it? They're unique spellings, and a lot of people are going to kind of miss the fact that there might be a problem with that. But, I mean, getting somebody's name spelled wrong might not be nearly so significant as the kind of things we have around data quality. I mean, it might be that you have just whole invoices that are just not in the system, for example, and it becomes a problem. But either way, on any particular piece of data, you know whether it's weak or whether it's strong. Conversely, if I think about it, the other axis I want to talk about, I want to talk about the trust level that you have in the, in that piece of data or that section of data, that report, whatever it might be. And this is really where it comes into the culture thing, because I kind of figure that if you trust a piece of data, if you trust a report, if you trust a system, then you're more likely to act on the data in there. It's almost irrelevant to how good the data is as to whether you're going to act on it. It's going to be about how much you trust it. I mean, the culture is all about what you do, how you think, and things like that. So if you think that a particular piece of data is good, I kind of hope that trust that you've got on it matches the quality. Anyway, having defined my axes, I want to be able to label the quadrants. And I'm going to say that if something is good quality and you trust it, it's useful. Conversely, in the bottom left corner, I'm going to say it's useless if it's neither good quality and accordingly we don't trust it. Right? That kind of makes sense. It's not really a problem. It's just that you've got some data that you know isn't great, and therefore you don't use it. I'm kind of okay with that. Obviously, there's something to fix, but it's not really a problem per se. The other two, though, this is more interesting. I kind of figure that if we've got good quality data, but we're not trusting it, it's a wasted opportunity, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you've got some strong data and everybody just goes, yeah, but we don't really trust that. And you know, especially as a data professional, that you've fixed it. Or as a business person, you've invested in that and you're missing out. You've got good data. You should be able to act on it. You've got to develop your trust. But if you've got data that is trusted, but it's not good quality, that means people are acting on that, despite the fact that the data is weak. And I think that that's dangerous, right? Because at some point, you're going to come unstuck. You're going to give a report out to somebody. You're going to put a press release out about something, and you could come unstuck, badly unstuck. You could you could do a tax return based on something if you trust that data, and all of a sudden it's wrong, and you've got fines coming your way, and you've got you've got problems. That is dangerous. Now, let me switch hats again back to the data side. Speaking to data people, see how negative these two words are that I've got? Dangerous, a very negative word. Wasted opportunity, also very negative. Even more so in some ways than that word useless. I don't know which one I'm supposed to point. The bottom left, where it says useless, it's probably down there, right? But, I mean, useless is, you know, it's obviously not a great word. It's not a very positive word, but it doesn't speak of imbalance. That imbalance, whichever way that's supposed to be, that imbalance is something that you can really reflect with these negative words. I actually like to come up with these words in a workshop with people, with my clients and so on. I get to be able to say, well, what do we want to describe something that is, you know, you trust it implicitly, but actually is low quality? What do we call that? Is that what's a name for that? And they will come up with very negative words themselves. And I find that this is really handy for the bit that comes next, right? Anyway, switching back. Business people again. And then we get to be able to place data on it. We get to be able to assess things. We get to be able to say, okay, what's the quality of this like and how do we trust it? And ideally, everything ends up where this red dot's just appeared. But you get to be able to assess that objectively. So when you've got things that are a bit weaker on one of the axes, right? I mean, then you get to be able to figure out where that fits. Obviously, it's great if everything is nicely balanced and so on, but make sure that you don't assess something and put it right on a line, right? If you put something on the line, you're just not committing. You can't really put a label on it. If you've got a scale, which is like 1 to 10, either don't have 0 or don't have 10. Because if you have 5, because it's actually a scale with 11 points, you know, it's an odd number of points, and so one of them is right in the middle, then it's on the line. It's hard to label it. You want to be able to make sure that everything falls into a quadrant so that you can then use that. I'm fine about saying this to business people too, because it's about saying, let's go through the process. We need to be able to pick a position on each axis so that we know which quadrant it ends up in, right? There's going to be elements of balance with that, sure, but there's also going to be things that are well and truly outside. There'll be things that are just, they're good quality, they're not trusted, and we've got to fix this. Interestingly, for that one, the way that we fix it is to fix the trust level. We know it's good quality. See, it's come up quite strong on the data quality line. What we need to do is to be able to socialize that, get communication going on about this, maybe give reasons for how we assessed that it was good quality, all of that kind of stuff, to be able to change the culture in the organization to say, hey, you can trust this. It's good. You could use it. You should use it. And all of that, and actually bring it up into that useful category instead of the wasted opportunity category, right? If we've got a dot over here in the dangerous bit, well, you would think that really you just need to bring that across, improve the quality. But I find that it's more complicated than that. Improving data quality is actually a longer process. And if you're in a dangerous situation, then I'm going to put it to you that the first thing that you need to do is actually address the trust level and say, you know what, we trust this too much. We need to be able to temper our trust level, bring it back to where it deserves to be, and then go through the exercise of improving the quality. Once it's there, sure, we can say, now let's actually let people know that it's better quality, and we can bring the, we can push that up to be useful. But I'm always reluctant to try to say, hey, let's just improve this, but without trying to change that trust first. I kind of figure if something is low quality, let's adjust the thinking about it. Then we can make the improvement. Then we can say, hey, look, here's the improvements that we did. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're letting people think it's you're letting people think it's good while you're trying to fix it behind the scenes. That only works if you can fix it like right away. If it's a really quick thing, then you might be able to get away with it. Otherwise, people are going to say, well, hey, why didn't you tell me as soon as you knew? You have to make the change that you can make. So for me, that means, okay, you've got to stop people from thinking that this report is good. You've got to maybe take it out of commission, put a thing on, put a watermark on it or something like that. People say, hey, don't trust this quite so implicitly. Then you can do the improvement. Then you can say, hey, look, we've made it better. Now you can trust it. Go your hardest. And so that doesn't matter kind of where something is. It could be fairly balanced, but just, you still want to improve it. And hopefully, if the quality isn't too bad, then maybe you don't need to reduce it as much. And when you improve the quality, have a look at that. It's not quite a horseshoe shape. It's kind of a lopsided horseshoe. I've said, okay, we're going to improve the quality significantly. And so then we can actually trust it even more than we used to trust it before. It might be that beforehand you were just like, it's mostly okay, but just every so often. So now, once you've demonstrated that actually all their concerns are addressed and the quality is actually now high because we've gone to the effort of improving that, then you can actually make sure that it's even more useful than it was, push it right up into that top right corner. But you see these little horseshoe-shaped movements that we do for anything that is above and to the left of that balance line. I say let's do a horseshoe shape, and so we end up with all of these little horseshoes. And when I'm doing this on a whiteboard, it works nicely. I'm just saying, okay, so if we got something here, this is what we're going to do for it. Got something here, this is what we're going to do for it. Anything below the line, that balance point, is just a matter of saying, let's push it as high as we can by socializing the actual level of quality that we have, so that people trust at an appropriate amount. So that's this quadrant. I want to talk to you about a process that I have for addressing where things are in that, right? And fantastically, as I was coming up with this, I found that all my 7 points started with the letter P. I think initially on my first draft, like 5 of them were, and I was just like, I wonder if I can, use a thesaurus and figure out how to. Anyway, 7 Ps. Let's have a look at them. The first one is picking the data that you want to assess, right? You don't want to just say, hey, let's just look at this company's data and just go, on the whole, where is it at? No. Pick some data, define what's in scope and out of scope of that thing that you're trying to assess. It might be a single report. It might be the data in a particular table. It might be, it's as granular as you want it to be, but you've got to define the boundaries of it, right? It might be the quality of a file that you receive from a third party, all kinds of things, but you've got to define it. If you don't, then somebody will be able to point out, hey, this is good, but this is bad, and then you're just like, well, what do we do? Do we put it somewhere in the middle? It's much easier to have it defined. Then you need to position that on the axes, but one at a time. You can't do both. You can just go and say, oh, well, this is good and we trust it, bang. No. Assess the quality independently of assessing the trust. They're two very different processes. I don't know what I'm on. They're two very different processes, and you need to be able to do them independently. You can assess the quality by comparing it to a known good source. You can assess the trust by asking people about things and how they act on it, all of that kind of stuff. Just that one of them is more emotional and cultural. The other one is very empirical. You can have a process that says, you know what, if we can demonstrate that actually the data that we've got matches the data that it's supposed to be, then great. And this actually comes back to, DevOps type processes. Your test-driven development and so on helps with assessing the data quality. It doesn't help so much with the trust, but if you've got strong DevOps, theoretically that should be helping the trust level of your data as well. Anyway, the next point is you got to present the findings. The reason you got to present it is because you got to have buy-in from the people, from the business people. You have to actually make an actual intentional decision to be able to deal with this stuff. You have to be able to report on what you've found to be able to then make that change. If you're reporting, hey, we can't trust this, you're giving that to a working group. You're telling the people that need to know, hey, this report, the quality is not what we thought it was. Hey, we've got to take action. Or this one here, you said you didn't really, this is a good report. It's a wasted opportunity, right? And bear in mind, they will have been involved in coming up with the imbalanced labels, those really quite negative, almost harsh in some ways, labels. And so by presenting and saying, we assess this, and this one scores a 3 on this scale and an 8 on this scale, look, it's imbalanced, the people in the room will be like, yeah, hey, we said, we agreed before we knew where things would be landing that that's a dangerous quadrant. And then you've got the opportunity for change, right? So these 3, I kind of figure, is all about the assessment bit, right? We haven't done anything yet to address anything. This is just figuring out where we're starting. Then we have to plan the change, working with that in that workshop environment to be able to say, hey, we want to fix this. You might have a few things, and there'll be things that people just go, yeah, we've got an appetite to do that one. You'll have things in the useless bracket that maybe you pick up on, maybe you don't. It's going to depend on the business priorities, all that kind of stuff, but plan the change. Be deliberate about it, right? Then you can actually push that dot around. You can say, okay, we need to improve this. We need to be, making that quality better. Or, hey, we need to be socializing the quality of this so that the trust level improves. You can push that dot. Go around the horseshoe if it's below the line. Push it up if it's below the line, right? Because then you can perform better. Then at that point, your data is stronger. Your data is more useful. You're able to trust it. You're taking more decisive action because people understand what the trust level should be for a particular report, and they are then more likely to be able to use it. By having these conversations, the culture in the organization is impacted. People actually do change. And so this is like my second block of 3 for being able to say, and this is how you actually improve the situation. But I said 7. And the last P is about practicing, because you need to keep doing this. You need to keep doing this over and over. This has to be an ongoing process. It's, just like DevOps, you've got to have a culture of improvement. And by saying, now let's grab the next thing. Let's redo this bit and see how does this look now. All of that. I mean, because it might be that actually you communicate that some things can be trusted better, and then the trust outweighs something. It might still be useful, but you might have a trust level of 9, but a quality of 7, because you just know there are a few things in there that aren't perfect. And there's still some more work to do. This doesn't have to be just a one-off process to say, yep, our data quality is perfect. I mean, the data people in the room will know that the data quality is not always going to be perfect. There's always an opportunity to be able to improve things. There's always an opportunity to be able to see things come through better. And that's why practicing can't be left off this list. We've got 3 for being able to figure out where we are. We've got 3 for figuring out where we want to be and how to get there. And then we've got 1 that says, and this has to be an ongoing process. We've got to keep doing this. We've got to go over and over. We're going to make the world better, the world of data within our organization. Let me talk about another quadrant. This one I call the ease of access quadrant, right? And what I find is that there are pieces of data in the organization that have great significance to the organization. The business people look at it. You, the audience member, as a business person, going to look at this data and just go, this is significant to us. It might be about staff retention. It might be about all kinds of things, but you've got data about things that are really significant to the underlying goals and values of an organization. It's significant. It's going to be meaningful. It's the type of thing that the board goes, you know what, hey, we should figure out how we're doing in some particular way. But the flip side of this is the ease of access. How easily can we get at that data? How easily can we analyze it? How easily can we even just kind of prove the quality of it and so on? There's all kinds of things around how easily you can get at this data. Label-wise, I kind of figure if it's significant and it's easy to do, it's almost a given that you're doing it. I'm just calling that a requirement. You need to be, if it's easy to do and it's significant to the organization, there's no question you need to be doing that, right? It's what it is. The flip side of that, if it's hard to do and it's actually not very significant, it's a why bother point. It's just not low hanging fruit. It's a big effort. It's not going to have much benefit. There's low ROI. You totally understand that there are things that you could discover that unless something improves or changes the significance, you're just not going to worry about it. It's not important enough for you to bother. It's a why bother kind of bracket. Now, if it's easy to get, but the significance isn't really there, which is actually a place that a lot of reporting and so on, a lot of analytics ends up starting off, because you've got data that you can pull in, you've got stuff that you can talk about till the cows come home. Sheep, if you're talking Hamish's language, but I say that because he's a sheep farmer, in case none of you are aware. I know he does data stuff and DevOps and all that kind of stuff, but really he's a sheep farmer. Any kind of, you might start by saying, well, let's report on the stuff that we can get to. It's a proof of concept, all of that kind of stuff. It's not particularly significant. And basically it's fluff. It's nice. It's, but nobody's going to be, changing the business significantly because of the stuff that's just fluff. It's nice to demonstrate and so on. But unless you can kind of find something in there that's more significant and it kind of shifts across the axis a bit, across towards being, a requirement, a given, then fluff is where it is. And it's not a problem. It's just that it's not really where you want to be. You want to be having everything in that requirement section. If you've bothered with it at all, you want it to be significant, right? That one down in the bottom right, that one where it's not trivial to get at, but the significance is there for the business. It's those things that you might not even be able to pull the data easily because you're not measuring that and so on. You've got to do surveys and all of those kinds of things. It's just not data that's readily at hand. Maybe it's in some archaic system and you're trying to pull it off to do analysis on it. It's going to be tricky. I kind of feel like that's like hidden treasure. There might be some real nuggets of gold, but you'll have to dig for it and so on, and you hope that it's going to be worthwhile. It might be, but you also might spend a whole bunch of time hunting for it, and it might not be quite as significant as you hoped, right? And of course, you'll end up with dots all over the place with this. You'll have some things that are worth trying to fight for. There'll be some things that are not worth doing. You might start with fluff, sure. And as things move on, you want to be able to try and get everything to be in that easy to access, and actually people are seeing the significance in what's there. If they see the significance, they're going to be acting on it. And there might actually be things that you don't realize are significant, but there's a profoundness to them. It might be that you develop that as you go, but that your first impression is that it's fluff, but then people start to notice, hey, actually, there's some stuff in here. But the big change that you do see is that as you get practiced at your data journey, as you improve in everything, whether it's the DevOps side, whether it's in your transformations and so on, you actually start to see that the ease of access improves and everything just gets lifted up in this particular quadrant. That you get better at doing stuff, you get better skills, everything just becomes easier, such that those things that were hidden treasures become a requirement. For those things that you were like, well, why bother with this? If they become easier to do, then yeah, they become fluff. But if it turns out that actually there's some things in there that are more profound, even they might shift across to the right a bit more. You might be having a stronger experience with that too. There's certainly some interesting things. The process that you go through is the same as before. It's the three ways of assessing where it's at. It's the three ways of then being able to say, let's do some improvement. And then it's saying, let's practice and repeat. It's that same one. I've just put the list on top there, but it's that same process of being able to make this better. Another quadrant that I like to talk about is testing coverage. I kind of figure that the amount that a particular tests cover the area that you want to be able to test and so on is offset by the cost. Now, I don't really know what the negative cost is. It's not value, because kind of value also talks about what you get for it. I just want to make it cost, but put a note on there to say it's kind of negative. I mean, I could label the axes a bit more and say this is high cost and this is low cost at the top. I've just gone with negative. Just work with me on this. It's fine. When I'm communicating this, I can always, if I'm on a whiteboard, I can just say, hey, would you rather I draw the arrow the other way around or whatever? But, and I can hear somebody. Anyway. So on this, I kind of figure that the top right-hand corner where we've got good coverage, and it's cheap to maintain that and so on, that's strong. We're good with that. If we've got good coverage, but it's costing a lot, it's hard work, you know? Like we end up spending a lot of money on this and so on. It's a lot of effort. It gets tiring. And so I've labeled that as hard work. It's imbalance. You don't, even if you've got good coverage, it wears thin. It's something that needs to be addressed. In the top left, if we don't have good coverage, but it's a lot of cost to do it. If we don't have coverage, but it's cheap, it's kind of pointless. It's just it's there for practicing, you know. It's not really worth anything, but it's not wasteful if we've got something, which is where if we've got something that's expensive and it's not even doing much coverage, then yeah, it's a waste. You shouldn't be spending time on those things. With these, you'll end up with dots all over the place. But on this, the arrows will go in both directions. The cost should improve. Things should become less costly as you get practiced at it. But as well as that, you build more coverage in, and of course you're pushing things across onto the right. And this is huge on the DevOps side. As you get better at doing all of this, in the same way that the ease of access improves, in the same way that you trust things better when you can establish the quality, the more you practice and so on, the more things are actually going in the right direction. Not only on the test coverage, but the cost, the ROI improves, the cost goes down, and these points move up into that leading quadrant, the strongest quadrant. Again, the process is the same. I hope you get this from this. The process is always the same. You assess, you plan, and you keep going over it over and over, right? You get buy-in from people, all of that kind of stuff, right? Let me switch to the data people again. And I'm going to talk about this one, which is the question quadrant. And on this one, we're saying, hey, what are the axes that you can put on there? that are going to spur on the conversation with the business, with the people that are your clients, with the people that are in your organization, where you want this to be able to impact the culture, right? You come up with something to put on each axis, and you come up with the labels. You have the balanced ones, which are just good and not so good, right? The not good, it depends on, the negativity of that just depends. It's not necessarily awful. It's just is what it is. But those two that are imbalanced, this is where you've got an opportunity to be able to really get the business people behind the concept of, hey, there's things that need to be addressed. You get their buy-in on creating those labels, and then you can show them, hey, this thing here is a lot more imbalanced and worth addressing than you might have thought. They come up with those words. You maybe just be involved in the process to make sure that they feel that they can be harsh words. There's no problem with that. I think back to the Gartner thing, and they talk about visionaries, right? As somebody who's got good completeness of vision, but their ability to execute is kind of on the bottom half. A visionary. So this is somebody who has great ideas, but their ability to execute isn't there. That's not actually particularly flattering, is it? It's visionary. Sounds good until you think about it. And then you're just like, well, actually, what's the point in being a visionary? It's like being the word dreamer these days is talked about as an American thing, and it's fine, not a problem. But if it's only ever dreams and visions, and it never becomes actual ability to execute, there's a problem. Somebody who's a challenger, which Gartner had as their top left, which is low completeness of vision but high ability to execute. They're standing on the shoulders of giants. They're taking advantage of the stuff that other people have done. But they're not coming up with the new ideas. They're not trying to say, yeah, let's make sure that actually our vision is there. They're trying to say, well, we do this bit and we do it well. We're not being ambitious about the other stuff. There's a negative aspect to that. It's kind of imbalanced. I think they're quite cautious in those labels, but I do think that it highlights the imbalance. And when you come up with your own, when you work with organizations and you say, hey, let's talk about where things are at, you can be as harsh as you like because you're trying to address culture. You're not just trying to flatter like Gartner is. You're trying to actually cause people to want to change, to do better, to act differently. So be as harsh as you like with those imbalanced labels. I can assure you it's worthwhile. Right? So what are the kinds of things you put on labels? Well, all kinds of things. I mean, I threw some of these ideas together. I look at, I've mentioned quality and trust and significance and so on, but think about security. Think about the maintainability. There's all kinds of things that come into play. The complexity versus the technical debt. There's things in play here. There's production-like. There's obfuscated. You think about Redgate's SQL clone tool. What are you using in your test environment? Does it look and feel like production? Is the data sufficiently obfuscated? Let's face it, you could be using an exact copy of production for all your test stuff. But it's dangerous because even though it's obviously very production-like, it's potentially a problem for the lack of obfuscation that it might have, the lack of masking and all of those kinds of things that you need to be considering for the sake of making sure that your data is properly looked after. On the flip side, you might have obfuscated everything and it performs poorly because it doesn't have good statistics, because you can't really use it for testing and so on. Edge cases are worth considering that. You want your test environment to have edge cases so that you've catered for everything. But production-like and obfuscated, have a think about some of the toolings that's out there. But, great things to stick on axes. Anytime you see a particular cultural problem where you are, think about what the axes are that helps you have a conversation within your business to be able to produce that change. Because it is easy enough to make that change happen. You just need to be able to present it in a way which is their language. Remember, this type of stuff is totally their language. Business people get this, they lap it up, they really just love it. Anyway, so I want to wrap this up. I figure, look, you need to use quadrants to be able to, I've mentioned a few times, speak their language. Business people get it. They need things simple, being able to say, here is where this thing is on this axis, here's where this thing is on that axis. Therefore, it's here, it's in this quadrant. Earlier, we labeled this, it's totally their language. But get their buy-in on those negative terms that you're going to use, because that's where the opportunity comes in to have the emotion in the story. When you come up with things that are really quite harsh, and they're just like, oh, really? That's dangerous? Or, oh, look, that's a waste? Oh, my goodness. Then that's the kind of thing that causes the change to happen. People will change if they're uncomfortable. Their negative terms brings their emotion into it, and then they're more likely to be able to actually change things. But that last point about practicing, you bring a culture of improving the culture like this, right? You go through the process. You say, hey, let's do this again soon. And you keep practicing it, because that overall improvement process, just like the whole DevOps story and so on, becomes significant to your organization, even more so than, I think, than the improvement that you might do on a particular piece of data, improving its quality, improving the trust level, getting things into those leading quadrants. But the culture of being able to say, hey, we have a way of being able to do this, I find is even more significant. Anyway, thank you for your time. I haven't seen a bunch of stuff appear in the Q&A, but maybe Hamish has been monitoring it. Hamish, are you there still?
I sure am, my friend.
I see you again now, too.
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Hey, look, Rob, that was a fantastic session, and thank you so much for the call out for my flock.
Sheep farming, yes.
Yeah. I often put in when I'm working with companies, I do let them know, look, I'm going outside of taking my 15-minute break to go feed my animals, what have you.
I know that primarily you're a data person, but hey, I've seen a question come in. Ariel has asked, how do you identify the dots, like the scope of the dots? And I want to say, look, it's entirely up to you. Quite often, it's going to be relatively natural in the fact that if you've got, so when you have particular reports that are coming through, or some Power BI models and so on that people are using and all that kind of stuff, often that can be a useful scope, but always feel free to tighten it a bit around being able to say, well, let's talk about this particular aspect of a data model, particular tab that people look at on a report that people just explore rather than kind of creating their own. But there's a huge it depends. A lot of it, I would say, depends on your appetite for being able to get these things fixed. But I find that in some organizations we're saying, okay, look, we want to talk about what you do with this file once you start processing it and so on, because I'll have an idea that there's a particular issue with something. Or maybe I'm just curious and I want an excuse to be able to say, hey, let's explore this thing here and figuring out. If I kind of know the answer to go, I think there's an issue with the data quality on this, then I'll try and define that kind of ahead of time, knowing that that's a useful scope. But quite often I'm just saying to people, look, I think we should find things to explore, and I get them to help define it. If I feel like it's probably too broad a definition, I'll try and tighten it a bit. Sometimes I'll start with one dot and I'll be like, hey, actually, this should be like 3 or 4, because I kind of want to break this up into this section here, which is pretty good, and this section here, which is actually pretty bad, and so on, and define it that way. So great question, Ariel. A lot of it just comes down to saying just it depends, practice it. If you get it wrong the first time, it doesn't matter so long as the conversation is progressing. Other questions, feel free to type them in.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to ask questions. And Ariel, thank you for asking a question that was actually on my mind, but I wasn't sure how to eloquently put it, and you did. Thank you. So yeah, I mean that. I was literally trying to connect the dots in my own head to ask a question about the dots. Rob, I really enjoyed your session, and the use of quadrants is really awesome. I mean, some of the terminology, dangerous, useful, useless, wasted, you pretty much can describe, a party night for myself. But what happened? In fact, yeah. I'm just wondering, bridging that gap, because often, the language of data people versus business people, and I talk a little bit about this in my session on culture. I mean, what's one of the biggest challenges that you face? You're a consultant, you run your own company, bridging that gap. When you have to sometimes speak language, and I just got to close the door, I realise my door's still open. So
I'll answer your question, even though you'll be off camera. That's fine, no problem. So what I find is that I'll be in an organisation and happily dealing with their data stuff and all of that kind of thing, but quite typically find that the data culture still needs improvement, that there's an inherent distrust about the database because of things that have happened before. Or there are people that just go, nope, it says this in the report, and they just inherently trust stuff, even though I might think that they've got issues with things and so on. Or for that matter, they want to get their testing coverage improved, but the cost of doing that is really prohibitive, and it's starting to become a negative thing in the organization and so on. And so I find that I will see these things, and for ages I'd be like, how do we have those conversations? How do I let somebody know that this is imbalanced? And when the quadrant idea kind of occurred to me, year or so ago, I worked out that actually it was a really useful way of communicating that, where I could get them to spot the imbalance and say, look, we've assessed this and it's here, and you've assessed this and you think that's here. Look, we've got some work to do. And so bridging that gap of how to speak the language and so on, it was entirely where this kind of quadrant thing came from.
Yeah, nice.
So yeah.